There's a question humanity has never dared to face directly. Can there exist a humane way to die? When a nation proud of freedom and human dignity simultaneously maintains the power to end human life, the line between justice and cruelty becomes frighteningly fragile. The Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution declares clearly, citizens are protected from cruel and unusual punishment. But the paradox lies in the fact that right beneath federal law, those who commit serious crimes can still be deprived of life. Each state has the right to decide whether they'll use capital punishment, and if so, by what method. At the end of the 19th century, America faced a bloody reality. Throughout hundreds of years of history, hanging was the most common form of execution across the country. But it was never a quick death. The condemned hung suspended, neck constricted by rope, body convulsing helplessly as lungs ran out of oxygen. Sometimes, if height and weight weren't calculated precisely, the neck bone didn't break immediately, and victims endured slow death by suffocation, a process that could last several minutes, even more than 10 minutes. Witnesses described purple faces, protruding tongues, bulging eyes, and horrifying sounds emerging from the throats of the hanged. This wasn't justice, this was legalized torture. Pressure from public opinion and the medical community grew increasingly intense. Doctors, lawyers, and reformers began asking, if society must maintain capital punishment, could it be done without turning it into public torture? The collective psychology of American society was changing. They still wanted to punish criminals, but didn't want to witness naked brutality. Some argued that quick, painless death could even be considered more humane. But how to achieve that? In 1886, New York State, one of the most progressive states at the time, decided to act. They established a special legislative commission with a single mission: research alternative methods for capital punishment. But before that, in 1881, a strange idea had sprouted in the mind of a man named Alfred Southwick, a Quaker known for compassion and belief in peaceful living. Southwick had heard the story of a drunk man who accidentally touched a working electrical generator. The man died instantly, no time to cry for help, no convulsions, no pain. Just one moment, then it was all over. From that unexpected death, Southwick conceived a contradictory idea. If electricity could kill that quickly, could it become a more humane execution method than hanging? That question not only opened a new chapter in American judicial history, but also ignited a bloody business war between two giants of the electrical industry. A war where human lives would become marketing weapons. Alfred Southwick wasn't the person you'd think of when mentioning capital punishment. He was a dentist in Buffalo, New York, a Quaker, a religion that opposes all forms of violence. But this gentle man became the father of one of the most controversial execution methods in United States history. In 1881, Southwick happened to witness the aftermath of a strange accident on a Buffalo street. A drunk man, staggering through the dark night, had accidentally touched a working electrical generator. No scream, no prolonged convulsions. The man collapsed on the spot, dead instantly. What should have been a random tragedy became a moment of enlightenment for Southwick. In his mind, a question wouldn't stop nagging. If death came that quickly, no time for pain, no time for fear, could this be the answer to the intractable problem of humane execution? As a Quaker, Southwick didn't support capital punishment, but he understood that contemporary society wasn't ready to abolish it. So then, if capital punishment couldn't be eliminated, could it be made less cruel? He became obsessed with this idea, an obsession many considered contradictory to his own religious beliefs. Southwick wasn't the only one concerned with this issue. In 1886, New York State government officially established a legislative commission to research alternative methods to hanging. This timing wasn't coincidental. America was in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and electricity was gradually transforming every aspect of human life. Electric lights began illuminating city streets. Electric motors replaced manual labor. The first subway was being built. Everything was being electrified, from factories to homes. And now, even death wouldn't escape that wave of progress. Southwick submitted his detailed report to the commission, describing the drunk man's death and proposing using electricity as an execution method. This idea quickly gained attention, not just for its feasibility, but because it fit the spirit of the age, modern, scientific, and seemingly civilized. But as soon as this idea began moving toward reality, it got tangled in a war not about justice or ethics, but about money and power. In the 1880s, America's electrical industry was torn apart by a fierce confrontation between two giants, Thomas Edison and George Westinghouse. Edison, the great inventor with his direct current system, DC, was dominating the market. But Westinghouse, with his alternating current system, AC, developed by Nikola Tesla, was gradually surging ahead thanks to superior electrical transmission efficiency. This wasn't just normal business competition, it was a survival battle. Edison knew clearly that if AC spread widely, his empire would collapse. And from there, he was willing to use any weapon, even coffins. Thomas Edison wasn't a man who easily accepted defeat. In the late 1880s, he was witnessing his DC electrical empire threatened by a dangerous rival, George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla's AC system. Technically, Edison knew clearly that AC was superior to DC for long-distance power transmission. It saved costs, was more efficient, and easier to scale. But admitting that truth meant he'd lose millions of dollars invested in DC infrastructure. So Edison decided to make a cruel gamble. If he couldn't win with technology, he'd win with fear. In 1887, Edison hired an engineer named Harold P. Brown, a respectable man no more or less than a skilled henchman. Brown sent a letter to the New York Post recounting the tragic death of a boy who touched an AC-powered telegraph wire. The letter was emotional, describing in detail the family's suffering and the deadly danger of alternating current. Edison saw opportunity. He didn't just want to warn about AC, he wanted to turn it into a symbol of death. Brown and his assistant, Dr. Fred Peterson, began designing an electric chair for Edison. But before using it to execute humans, they needed to prove that AC was the perfect killer. One day in 1888, at West Orange, New Jersey, Edison organized a public demonstration that many later called Theater of Cruelty. He set up a metal plate connected to a Westinghouse AC generator, voltage up to 1,000 volts. Then, before reporters and officials, he began killing animals one by one. Dogs, cats, horses, even a circus elephant, all were placed on that death plate. When current ran through their bodies, horrific scenes unfolded. Flesh burning, fur smoking, and thick stench enveloping the area. Reporters witnessed and recorded every detail. Then newspapers across the country published sensational headlines. The new term electrocution, combining electricity and execution, was born from these bloody demonstrations. Edison had achieved his goal, linking the image of AC with brutal death. But he didn't stop there. To prove DC was safer, Edison and Brown repeated experiments with direct current. This time, animals were shocked but didn't die. They were just stunned, then revived. Edison turned to the public and declared, "See? DC only stuns, but AC kills. Do you want this killer electricity in your homes?" It was a brutal and genius marketing strategy, turning a business competitor into a life-threatening danger and turning his own product into the only safe choice. But Edison had one more move. He wanted to ensure that when New York State chose a new execution method, they'd choose AC. And if successful, every time a death row inmate was killed by alternating current, it would be a reminder that AC was the current of death. This strategy was so dark that even Edison's supporters shuddered. But in the battle for millions of dollars in market share, Edison was willing to trade everything, including his conscience. On June 4, 1888, the New York State Legislature passed a historic law, replacing hanging with execution by electrocution. This decision was packaged in the veneer of scientific progress and humanitarianism, Legislators declared this was a civilized step forward, a way to end the barbarism of the outdated hanging method. But hidden behind those flowery words was a cunning power game, a game where the lives of death row inmates were just chess pieces. The specialized committee had the task of deciding which type of current would be used, Edison's DC or Westinghouse's AC. And this is where conflicts of interest became suspiciously obvious. Dr. Fred Peterson, still working for the Edison Company, was simultaneously heading the government committee. A man with direct interest in sabotaging AC's reputation was given the power to decide which technology would be linked to the image of execution. The result was easy to predict. The committee officially chose alternating current for use in the prison system statewide. When the news was announced, George Westinghouse couldn't believe what he'd just heard. He immediately understood the intent behind this decision. Edison was trying to turn AC into the death current, linking Westinghouse's product with the image of death and brutality. Westinghouse reacted fiercely, publicly declaring that execution by electricity was cruel and unusual, a direct violation of the 8th Amendment to the United States Constitution. He firmly refused the contract to supply AC generators to prisons, even though it could bring large profits. But Westinghouse didn't just stop at refusal. He decided to fight legally. When the first death row inmates were sentenced to electrocution, Westinghouse paid out of his own pocket for lawyers to appeal for them. He didn't do this out of compassion for these criminals. He did it to protect his brand, to prevent legal precedent from turning AC into a symbol of death. Appeal hearings dragged on for months, with Westinghouse's legal team arguing the new punishment was unconstitutional, barbaric, and insufficiently tested. But Edison and Brown didn't sit idle. They appeared in court as experts, giving testimony under oath that execution by AC was quick and painless, a humane form of death. Judges, persuaded by the scientific appearance of the argument, rejected all appeals. New York State won the case. The electric chair was officially approved, and on January 1, 1889, the world's first law permitting execution by electrocution took effect statewide. Ironically, although Westinghouse refused the contract, Edison stepped up to accept it. He secretly purchased AC generators, possibly through intermediaries, and supplied them to the New York prison system. Edison himself, who'd spent his entire career developing DC, now became the supplier of AC equipment to kill people. And for many years afterward, the dark term to be Westinghoused became slang for being executed by electrocution, a brutal marketing victory Edison had craved. Death now carried a brand name. On August 6, 1890, in the basement of Auburn Prison in New York, history was about to witness a bloody experiment. William Kemmler, a 29-year-old man sentenced to death for killing his wife with an axe, was becoming the first person in the world to be executed by electric chair. Kemmler wasn't a bold or dangerous criminal. He was just an alcoholic who in a fit of rage had caused tragedy. But now, he would be a milestone in judicial history, a name forever linked to the question, can humane death truly exist? A day earlier, prison officials conducted a test run on a horse. The animal was strapped tightly to the chair, current was turned on, and the horse died almost instantly. 14 doctors present nodded in approval. The system worked well. They confidently declared Kemmler would feel no pain. But that confidence would soon shatter in the suffocating execution chamber. That morning, 25 witnesses gathered in Auburn's basement. Among them were 14 doctors, prison officials, and some carefully selected reporters. The atmosphere was tense, but full of expectation. They believed they were about to witness a step forward for civilization. Kemmler entered the room wearing clean clothes, relatively calm. He was asked to sit in the large wooden chair, arms and legs bound with leather straps. A wet sponge was placed on the top of his head, then a metal cap tightened. Another electrode was attached to the lower part of his spine. Kemmler looked around, breathing heavily, then said his last words, "Do it quickly." The signal was given. The switch flipped. 1,000 volts of AC current poured into Kemmler's body. The man stiffened, muscles taut as steel cables, chest swelling as if about to explode. 17 seconds passed. Then the current was cut. Doctors moved closer, checking for a pulse. One placed his ear to Kemmler's chest. Then a scream rang out. "He's still alive! The heart's still beating!" Chaos erupted in the room. Some witnesses screamed, demanding it stop. Others fainted. But the law had ordered Kemmler must die. The switch was flipped again. This time, the current stronger and longer. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Kemmler's body began smoking. The smell of burning flesh spread through the sealed room, a sickeningly sweet smell that made many cover their mouths. Skin beneath the head electrode began to char, hair caught fire. Blood flowed from his nose and ears. One witness later recounted, "We were watching a human being being roasted alive." Unresolved. The entire process took 8 minutes of torture. When the current was finally cut, no one in the room still believed this was a humane form of execution. The New York Times published an article with a massive headline, "Far worse than hanging." A doctor present said, "I'd rather witness 10 hangings than one more like this." And George Westinghouse, when asked for comment, replied coldly, "They would have done better using an axe." The disaster of William Kemmler's execution didn't make Thomas Edison stop. He continued the war against AC with stubbornness bordering on madness. In 1903, 13 years after Kemmler's horrific death, Edison produced a 74-second film documenting the execution of Topsy, a circus elephant sentenced to death for killing its abusive trainer. Before a crowd of thousands at Coney Island, Topsy was fed carrots laced with cyanide, then electrocuted with 6,600 volts of AC. The giant elephant collapsed within seconds, smoke rising from its feet. Edison screened this film everywhere, once again attempting to link AC's image with brutal death. But history had its own ironic intentions. Although Edison had spent decades and an enormous fortune sabotaging AC, the war of currents ultimately belonged to Westinghouse and Tesla. By the early 20th century, most of America had switched to AC electricity due to lower costs and higher efficiency. Edison's DC gradually became obsolete technology, and in a memorable moment of irony, late in life, Edison admitted in an interview, "Alternating current is truly much more efficient." That admission came too late, but it exposed the truth that he'd known it from the beginning and was still willing to turn death into a marketing weapon. Flooding addition failed to destroy AC, the electric chair survived and spread. From the Auburn disaster in 1890, 26 states, the District of Columbia, the federal government, and the U.S. military all officially adopted the electric chair as an execution method. Thousands of death row inmates died in similar wooden chairs, with results sometimes quick, but often catastrophic. Some states sought other options. Gas chambers became the preferred method in California and Arizona, while Utah maintained execution by firing squad, allowing inmates to choose death before a firing squad. It wasn't until the mid-1980s, when lethal injection was introduced, that the electric chair began to be widely replaced. Lethal injection was advertised as more humane, more gentle, promises identical to what was once said about the electric chair a century earlier. But then reports of botched injections, inmates waking mid-procedure, or dying in prolonged agony also began appearing. The cycle repeats. The electric chair still exists in some states like Tennessee, Alabama, and Florida, usually as a backup option if lethal injection isn't feasible. It's the legacy of a dark era, of a dirty business war, and of the illusion that humans could find a way to kill people in a civilized manner. The question Alfred Southwick posed over a century ago still has no answer. Can a truly humane execution method exist? Or is the very idea of humane death an irreconcilable contradiction? The history of the electric chair, born from ambition, power, and blood, has perhaps answered that question in the most painful way.